So we are at our last talk for the day. And our next speaker worked on the game Inside, which is one of my personal favorites. It's just super nice and kind of weird, but that's a good thing. And he will be talking about the subtleties of Inside. So please welcome Martin Fasterholdt.
Hello, good afternoon, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Martin Fasterholdt, and I'm a gameplay designer at Playdead. I've been there for about 5 years or so now. And a gameplay designer could really mean anything, but in my case, it's like a mix of different things. So early in the production, I'll be doing prototyping, and then later on, I'll do like level design. Later on again, I'll do specific interactions, which you're going to see a lot of here, with stuff like pushing a button or pulling a lever and stuff like that. And later again, I'm doing like cleanup and programming and stuff. And overall, maybe half my time is spent programming and the other half is spent in Unity or all over the place. So I'm going to present a lot of stuff from Inside, and this is work done by a lot of people, so I'm here just presenting it and reaping the benefits of everybody else, but really the credit should go to the whole team. There's very little inside the game that's just one person that's responsible, because everything is bounced around, and there's people making audio, people making graphics, and there's people doing code. And so really it's not all from me, it's really a huge thanks to the whole team, which is pretty amazing. I'll also be ranting a bit about design and choices, and we thought this and we did that, and it's all my opinions, so I'm not kind of speaking on behalf of all of them. It'll just be me ranting about these things. Yeah, so the whole talk is going to be about Inside and about very subtle things inside the game. A spoiler warning is due. I'm going to spoil some of the puzzles. If anybody is worried, I'm not going to spoil anything related to the ending of the game. A gore warning is probably also due. There's going to be some fairly bloody scenes, but I think you'll be okay. The focus throughout the talk is going to be subtleties, so things you may or may not have noticed, but things that are definitely turned way down. Often we would implement a thing, and it would be very obvious that it's there, and then we'd be like, turn it down a notch, and we'll turn it a bit down, and like, turn it down more, and we would turn it down until you almost didn't see it, and it'll be like, yep, that's the one we're keeping. And the general theme with these subtleties, because I've tried to pick things that I've been most involved with, the common theme will be animation and input. So I tend to work really closely with the animator, and I'm kind of like the implementation and the design of it, and then he kind of creates the visualization. So there'll definitely be a theme throughout regarding animation and inputs. And really, a lot of it boils down to this battle between having a player be in control of the character while also playing like a nice continuous animation. And this was something we were really striving to do, having this control while playing animation, and it's not an easy task. This talk will hopefully be interesting to hear, and maybe some of it will be like directly applicable to something you're working with, or maybe it'll be indirectly just interesting to see what we have done with different things. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a development build of Inside, very close to release. And I'll be running the whole presentation inside this development build, and then you'll see why in a second. So it's a bit of an experiment, and hopefully it'll work out, and it will be interesting and it will be good, but we'll see. So there's a warning as well. Live demos will do different things, and I almost expect something will go wrong along the way, but we shall see. But yeah, what do we have here? Yeah. So let's have a look at this thing. So it's mostly like just the regular game if you've played it, except I have these weird menus where I can do all sorts of things. So one of the things I can do is like I can go super fast. Another thing I can do is I can go super slow. I can also pause the game. not as impressive as the slow motion. And then one of the features you're going to see a bunch, which was most definitely not intended to be used like this, is being able to kind of change the camera view. And the trick is that it's really, really sensitive control, so I will be fiddling around this as we go along. And this very quickly, very much breaks the game. We can try and do something weird here, maybe. Try something here, just to check it out. Anywho, that's the camera thing. I've never written a talk with this many notes and this few slides. Okay, so this talk is going to be structured like a bunch of chunks about different themes that are somewhat related, but also not. So the first thing I'll talk a bit about is breathing. So there's this system of breath happening throughout the entire game. Here comes this camera fiddliness. So if you look closely, you can see his chest move. Maybe you can hear it if I turn it up a bit. So his chest is moving very subtly back and forth, and his head is doing like a slight nod as well. And on top of all of the animation, we can add this layer of breathing, and it's done with additive poses that we then blend in and out of. So he has like a pose breathing out and a pose breathing in, and then we can blend between them. And these poses are in turn controlled by the audio, directly from the audio system. We use WeWise, and that feeds in and tells the game how he should breathe, so that always matches up. And in turn, then the audio is controlled by lots of things from the game. So that could really be anything. It could be if you're running a different animation theme, it tells the audio to play a different breath. If we're moving in a certain way, the more you move, the more intense your breath gets. We can have certain triggers that ramps up the breath doing a specific area. Every time you interact with something, you can change the breath. So if you grab a lever, he kind of breathes through his nose, and if he's like pulling or moving something, his breath gets a little bit more intense. So there's really all sorts of these things that can all change the breath, and they do it all by going through the sound, so changing the sound, and then the sound in turn changes how we're moving these additive poses on top. So if we just try and run around here for a bit. It's been an active day now. Now you can see his breath is kind of intense, and then he kind of slowly calms down. So you'll see me doing this a lot. This is save points, but not the ones that you kind of play, but the ones we've been using, so they have funky names. And when I load another one, you'll also be able to see everything flying in strangely, because there's no fade screen, because we need to be able to see things. Yeah, so this next scene is hopefully a good example of this breath. So he's a bit tense here, there's something rumbling in the background, and in a minute he'll be chased by this car, and that will get his breath going. Yeah, so this was a more tense moment where he really gets scared. Then we let it take a long while before the breath is all the way out and he's calm. And sometimes you can also hear if he's breathing really violently or if he's kind of trying to handle his breath. So here you can see, so here he's kind of like bent forward, but the breath is still layered on top. So we have this crouch theme where he's kind of sitting down and kind of trying to sneak, but the breath can still be applied on top of it, and we can raise it a bit here because there's something there happening in the background, and he's attentive to it, he's not relaxed. So next I'll just play a small section of the game where you can hear the breath. Another thing you can notice in this section will be his inhale and exhale. So we had the breath in, and then we were jumping around, and it felt weird when you jumped and the breath didn't react. So we implemented this thing where every time you take off into a jump, he would inhale, so you're like, and then every time he lands, he exhales. So no matter what else is going on with the breath, that would kind of override it, because it was just too strange that he would breathe weirdly compared to these kind of action animations. So now I think I'll just play a little bit. Try not to die. That was breathing, and yeah, I think I'll just skip to the next one. So this was from kind of early on in the game, and you play for a bit, and then you come to this section, and these chickens are really loud. So the running sequence you just saw was kind of our introduction to have you completely understood moving around and jumping. And if you kind of make it through that, then we're like, okay, good. We don't have to worry about that. We've introduced moving and jumping. And after that, you kind of walk for a bit. You meet these chickens. You walk through a field. And then you get to this barn-looking area. And here we start to really build upon the movement we just established and add a lot more detail and teaches the player a lot more things. So the first thing you do is you jump to this rope. And then this is the kind of the first time you push up really on the stick, and you learn, okay, so up on the stick is also a movement. It's climbing up the rope, easy enough, and then we're inside. And now sneakily when falling down here, now you're kind of stuck in this area of devices, and you won't get out before you've kind of experimented and learned the things that we hope you'll learn. So this is where we really establish these interaction with all sorts of things. So there's this lever you can grab, and there's this thing over here. And we established this thing where we have one button. There's two buttons in the game. There's one button for jumping, and there's one button that's just the action button or the grab button. And here we try to really cement how this action button works. So the way it works with the lever is you hold down the button, you grab the lever, you let go of the button, you release the lever. So that then becomes the notion that's happening with everything. So if you go over here and you want to grab this one, you hold the button, he grabs, and importantly, he keeps holding it until I let go with the button. So there's this mapping. Hold means holding the button, and you've already done this with some boxes before reaching here. So you know which button it is. And here we start having this standing still and applying pressure. So if you push the stick, then you push the lever. And similarly over here, if you have this one and you pull, then you pull the little lawnmower handle there. And now I'm keep holding the stick, so he keeps pulling the lever. So now we further build it and say, okay, if you keep holding the stick, then you keep pulling. And when I let go of the stick, I do this, and if I let go of that, then I let go of the handle. And similarly, this handle over here, there's like a spring in it, so if I keep holding it, it will be pushed to the left, but if I let go, it bounces back. So now just experimenting with this, and maybe not even really solving the puzzle, but we've established this notion of you can grab at this button, and whatever you put on top will be the gesture of where to pull it, right? And now we've explained that entire thing without having any sort of tutorial in the game. And over here is what you actually need to kind of get a bit further. There's this door, and there's this thing you can also grab, and you can push it and pull it, but nothing happens. So here I want to talk a bit about conveying failure. So in level design, for example, if you have a jump and that jump looks like it's just outside of reach, but it looks like if you could just jump a little bit better, you're gonna make it. If you have a jump like that in your game, the player will endlessly try to make this jump, and it's really frustrating to see. So if you have a jump, it's good advice to make it sufficiently long so that it really looks, okay, there's no way I'm gonna make it across a jump. And a jump is just a simple case. You could also have a puzzle where any arbitrary wrong solution could look almost feasible. And if that is the case, then the player will just be stuck there for a long while before they eventually move on and didn't have a good experience with it. And we have lots of puzzles where we would actually throw away puzzles just because there were like these quirks or these like failed solution that was not convincingly wrong and it just didn't feel elegant. So we would remove it all. And returning to this door, we have animations to show that you're interacting with the door, but it's not the right way. So if we had no feedback, then the player just thought, oh, okay, maybe nothing has happened or I don't interact with it. But here we have this push and this pull, and hopefully in combination with having just been introduced to the lever and the lawnmower thing, and having just climbed up the rope where you did a vertical motion, hopefully you grab this and maybe you try the horizontal one, but then you try vertically. You try pushing the stick up, in which case you just lift the board off. And then we've established, okay, now you can grab, and then no matter the direction, it's a pull in that direction, both horizontal, vertically, and so forth. Then you do a little gesture to push in, open the door, and the chicken comes in. Just play for a little bit here. We can hear the chicken. They go mad. And here again with this lawnmower, if you push it, you can see he leans forward slightly, and then you yank it, and you actually have to kind of yank it a couple of times before it starts going. And all the chickens are with you. Yeah, and then as the final thing, before leaving the area, you get another box, and you grab it with the same button, and you push it, so we build on the same notion. So now, after this, we're done introducing all of the interactions. The rest will just kind of build on that or be riffs on that. What do I have? So this is just a cool little thing I wanted to show. So here we have another one where you grab it with the button and then you push up to lift this really heavy hatch. But building on this notion of conveying the failure, what happens if you kind of stand on this side and grab it? And of course we could make it so that you didn't grab the lever or you switch to the correct side, but instead we let you grab the hatch standing on top of it, and then when you pull it, it's just like you get this and a little rumble in the controller, and then you're none the wiser, and then maybe you're like, okay, I gotta go on the other side. And lift them. So this notion of conveying the wrong interaction is something we implemented throughout the game, and I think it's extremely important to guide players in the right direction. Next we jump here. I think there's loud chickens here as well. So building on top of we have the animations of the boy as kind of the ground layer, and then we have this breathing as additive poses on top of it. And now I'm going to show you a kind of a procedural layer that goes yet on top of again. And you've maybe already seen it, but now we'll see it more in action. And it's the boy looking at things. So the way it's done is that his head and then gradually his spine is being rotated to do this look at, and then his shoulders are actually moved in reverse direction. And what it will do is that I think now he's kind of looking down at the chicks, or the birds down there, very subtly, and then here he'll kind of change and he'll be looking up. Maybe I do a little zoom. Zip. So he's looking up, and what he's looking at is that juicy safe up there. And it checks the direction of the head, so if the head is too far out of the direction of the object, then he won't look. It will kind of blend out. And the reason why that is an advantage is so like if he starts doing random idle animation where he's like looking in a different direction or doing whatever, fiddling with his clothes, then that will mean that his head will be rotated away from the point and it will automatically just ease out. He can do his idle animation, and then when he's back in his kind of natural idle, then he'll look back up at the safe. So here if we move across, now he kind of like, yeah, now it's too steep to look back up at the safe. So here's a good example where this point of interest or look at is really used a lot. So we've introduced these characters kind of walking in these lines in the background, but we want to emphasize them. So while you're in this little alleyway here, you can see his head is fixated on these guys in the background, and hopefully the player will kind of follow his head and also look. There was a little bit of idle where he looked away, so it's like, okay, we can't have his head kind of start spinning. So while he's looking away, we let him do that, and otherwise we really keep focus on these guys in the background and what's up with them. Then you get over here and you're kind of pulling off these boards, and now he's like busy interacting, so there's other animation playing, so of course he's not looking into the background while he's pulling off boards. But when he's done, you can kind of look back again. Yeah, so apart from just being a detail layer and nice, we can also use it to emphasize kind of gameplay elements. So here he's kind of nervous, his breath is a little heightened, and he's looking very set on this weird machine in the background. So there's definitely something up with those. He seems very fixed on it. You will soon find out why, because if you flick this switch over here, they turn on. And if they catch you in their light, then they whack you. So this layer of look at kind of helped us kind of guide direction and put focus on things, and kind of subtly guide the player without taking any control away. So there's the first bit of this kind of keeping the player in control. Where am I going? So to continuing onwards on this notion of staying in control or letting the player stay in control, I'll show you something here. You kind of fall down on this platform, and then the boy plays this slow animation of kind of stumbling to his feet, put his hands on the wall, and being ready to move on. Let's just do it one more time. He's taking his sweet time getting up. But on the other hand, we don't want the player to be stuck there because he looks like he's doing okay. So now I'm going to try and push right from the start. And I can actually move through that. So this notion of having these two different ways of exiting out of an animation or unstunning is something we use an awful lot. Let's just try and unstun one more time. So I'm holding the right stick now. So there's still a little bit of the animation, and this we can control which way this unstun should work. So we can set the frame he should unstun. So we can say, okay, I want to force the player to show a little bit of or to see a little bit of the impact animation, but then they're okay, they're free to go. But on the other hand, if the player is like waiting and kind of patiently looking at it, then there will be a natural animation of kind of stumbling to his feet. And this is something we have all over the place. Next we're going where? Next we'll take a very close look at this here lever. See how close I can get before it gets uncomfortable. Maybe this is okay. Yeah, so similarly to the fall, that's something that just happened while you're playing. You fall down to this platform and then we have 2 exits. This is more of a case where the player actively takes control. So similarly to the other lever we saw, this is a lever you just kind of grab it and then you can like pull it. That's the function. And all it does is open that door in the background. But here we see some more examples of this unstunning. So if I'm grabbing the lever, he continues to grab it, of course, and as soon as I let go, he plays this animation where he kind of slowly let go and he's like naturally back. But on the other hand, if I'm holding the left stick, he'll do this. So he's forced still in a little bit, I can't remember, but like 7 frames or something of the let go animation before he's like, okay, now if you're pushing right, we'll let you run. And similarly, if you jump, we can also let you go, and they have 2 different frames, so we can choose which does which. So sometimes jump is allowed to unstun a little bit quicker because it's more of an aggressive movement, so it doesn't look weird, whereas the running away is kind of a more soft movement, so we let that happen a bit later, or whatever fits the specific case. We can do the whole thing, grabbing it from the other side as well as this slowly relax animation, or if you hold to the right, you're in control. So this is the start of examples of these being in control. So we don't want the player even to be stuck in that time where he's letting go of the lever. As soon as it makes sense to let go and let the player run away, we'll let them do it. While also trying to balance the animation, of course. So if you do wait, then we still want to make it look natural, and we don't want to just do a straight blend to a pose that wouldn't look nice. And in the same spirit, we have these small timers that controls what happens if you kind of give really small input. So if I just now I'm just kind of tapping the action button, kind of does this weird grab of the lever and then kind of stumbles back. So hopefully that will show the player that they're on the right track to interacting with this lever. And we have a little bit of a timer, and it doesn't look like just like a 2-frame animation or something like that if you were to actually just play the animation for however long you held down the button, but instead we have this little piece of logic that just makes a little wiggle. And if you do play, like press left or you press jump, of course you're going to be allowed to get out of that one. And similarly, if you're holding the lever and you kind of let go for a split second, there's a little bit of a timer as well that kind of says, okay, you can't let go less time than this because then it just looks weird. And this notion of kind of letting the player be in control is all over the place. It's both with the things you interact with, or the fall we had before, where you just fell to this platform, and then there was like kind of 2 paths or multiple paths for getting up. It's also the case for these levers, or really anything you interact with, and it's also the case for just the general movement of the characters. So here, if we jump up this ledge and kind of start running, that's kind of one scenario, but on the other hand, if you climb up while holding right all the time, there's like a different transition animation from climb up to start run that plays in this case. We can try it again. So here I'm climbing up, and I'm up, and then I start running. And next I'm gonna just hold right while I climb up. So he kind of leans directly into it from his climb. And this is implemented all over with the movement to kind of keep the player fluent all the time. And it's particularly with these levers and buttons, it's implemented to really keep the player in control while interacting with this, so we don't have to take it away and have it feel like this mini cutscene. That one. camera. Yeah, so similarly to the grabbing and releasing of the button, here you have a puzzle where you're flicking the switch and then you kind of have to flick it back to get these weird guys in a wagon off the track. But what we're going to focus on is the lever again. So here if I start pulling it but immediately change the direction, then it's allowed by the game. So we don't want the player to even lose control while pulling the lever, right? We want them to have control the whole duration. If nothing else kind of interferes, then they should be in control. So here if I'm kind of doing small things, I'm allowed, and if I do a bigger movement, there's kind of an animation where he kind of leans into it a little bit more. So here is like, okay, that's a very small movement, no animation, a little bit more. Okay, he gets a little bit of leeway there. So that really lets you kind of change direction really fluently. And of course you can also let go of the grab button at any point, in which case the lever is still there and you're still in control. So you can always let go. We never kind of take that away from you. Maybe we try and solve this one. If we can. And they fall down over there. So now we're underwater, and the boy has learned to breathe underwater mysteriously, and here we're grabbing this lever over here to the right, and here it's even more complicated than the land because now we have like omnidirectional movement. So now you could come at it from any sort of direction. So here we have a bunch of different grab animations. So this is one of them where you kind of swim into it, and we kind of try and blend the rotation and stuff. We have a grab animation, and all of that is similar to the lever, but just more fiddly because you're underwater and you can reach it from different directions. But the main thing I wanted to show with this one, if I can get the camera to act. So here, all you have to do is you have to pull out this cylinder thing. Again, we have this conveying of the wrong direction, so if you do this, you'll kind of lean against it, but nothing will happen. And if you pull in the other direction, it will start moving. While it's moving, again, we never take away the control. You can always let go, of course, but also the progression of this one action, we never take it away, and you can actually push it back if you want. And then, of course, a rule isn't a rule before you break it. So here we break the rule as well. So if you pull this cylinder, I think it's 80% out, then we actually take control and just pulls it out all the way, no matter what input you get. But most likely, if you're trying that anyway, like if you pulled it that far, most players are like, we expect that they would just hold it and then continue to pull it, and that would be what happened anyway. And if someone really unluckily pulled it just to that moment and started returning, we don't want to punish that. So we're like, okay, if you get this far, then we kind of auto finish the last little bit. Zoom out here. Yeah, so here I'll just name drop a bit. So if you're ever looking for a book about game design, I would highly recommend the book called Game Feel, written by a guy called Steve Swink. He also, in this book, he talks at length about this real-time control, or this notion of real-time control, and the importance it has for video games. So there's a lot more elaborate on that. The reason I mention it is both to recommend the book, but also to point at this number he presents. And it's a number that comes from various studies in psychology and also studying games, and it's a number of 0.2 seconds, or 200 milliseconds. And that's what he proposed as the time you will need your game to react for the player to feel in control of that action. So 200 milliseconds is the time from I'm clicking the button to it streams down to the computer and the computer reacts, and I need to see that reaction. And if it's 200 milliseconds or faster, then I'll connect whatever I did with that thing happening on the screen. And if it's slower than that, then I'll start to feel sluggish, or it will start to feel out of connection. So that's a nice benchmark, or I've used it a lot for all sorts of things. It's not you read the book and this is the first time you'll hear about real-time control. He's just really good at elaborating on it. And this number, 0.2 or 200 milliseconds, has been helpful for me as kind of thinking of it as a moment. And if you can do it faster than that, then it will be tight, and the slower you are above it, or the more you are above it, it will feel more and more sluggish, just going towards awful. And this is both the case if you have like one button press. So if you click jump, you want to see the character jump. There it's exceptionally important. There you will really feel it. But it's also important if you have like a continuous movement. So really you want the player to always have these 200 milliseconds on any sort of action. And that's what we've tried to do with a lot of these actions or interactions with the levers and with the climbing, is to always let the player have that control. So I think that's extremely important, and it's a good rule of thumb to kind of carry with you, and you can use it. So this was some examples of how we kind of balance this having control while also showing some animations. We're not going here. Going rotate. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, yes. There. So I'm just gonna play for just a minute, I think. Okay, so we'll leave the funky crate behind and talk about this button. So there's many ways you could have done a button. You could have just have the thing toggle when you click and play no animation, or you could play one fixed animation and then just take away control and that be it, and then try and maybe play the animation as quickly as possible. But we wanted to try and take it a bit further and really keep the control while you click this button. Again, on this notion on we want to play the animation but also be in control. So one thing here is if I hold down my action button on my controller, he will also keep holding the button. And when I let go, he'll let go. If I click briefly, he'll do it quickly, and if I hold it, I can just hold it as long as I want. So what happens if he's like standing in front of it and doing the same thing? So like, okay, we'll make another animation where he pushes the button from this side. And then what happens if he's over here? Does he turn around, or does he... okay, we'll make a reach back and push the button animation. And then what we ended up doing was that we made these as additive poses instead of animations in their own right. So they're actually only applied additively to his upper body. And what that let us do is that we can blend together all three. So if I hold it down here and start moving forward, he'll continue to have his hand on it and just simply blend to the other poses. So in this way, then we also get all the in-between positions. So if he's standing kind of here in a like half in the center, half to the left, we'll just play that animation and it'll fit. And also if you start moving while you have your key pressed, we'll still have animation to show you, and the button will still be kind of present in the world. These animations turned out to not work if you're running past it. So instead we added like a running push. So in the start we had 3 of those as well that was kind of weirdly blended together, but it turned out not to be the best solution. So we ended up just having this one, and he just kind of slides his hand along, and that's kind of precise enough to vaguely hit the button. And this one we could also use if you're kind of pressing it like this and then start running, then you'll get the run. And then of course the rule needs to be broken as well. So if you jump past the button and click, we tried to have some additive animation with the arms kind of flailing, but it didn't really work very well, and it looked weird some of the times. And when it did work, it didn't really look much different than your regular jump because he's already kind of flailing. So in the end, we just didn't have any animation for that one. And sometimes if you do like a turn and click, let's see if I can do it. Yeah, there I think it happened. So if you're in the middle of a turn and we're like, we can't use either hand, like there's no way we can get him to push, then we're also just like, forget it, no push, right? So the gameplay kind of takes over when it's really necessary, because we need the button to absolutely always react to your input. That's like number one. If we don't have that, then everything else doesn't matter. So it needs to always be pushed, and if you click several times, it will kind of queue up your input and always execute them. So all input is kind of listened to. Like if I start spamming it, it will kind of queue them up internally and then actually execute them. So the exact numbers of taps are being made. But while on the other hand, we also really would like to play a lot of these animations. So this was an example of some of the ways we get away with playing the animation while don't taking away the control from the player like at all. Yeah, I think there's some internal speedrun records at the office, and who can play it faster with the fast forward, it gets very fast. Next, it's story time. So while we were making this, we were not really allowed to talk about it. And I had a lot of very curious friends who kept asking me about this game and what I was working on it, and I couldn't really tell them anything. And this went on for years because it was far into production before we really released much, and even then we couldn't really talk about much outside of whatever we'd released, so it was really limiting. But then at one point I caved, and I told them about what I'd been working on that week, and that was this fern in the background. And then it became this gimmick, so I ran it, like all of a sudden I was like, I broke my oath, and then I talked at length about this fern and the whole week me and the animator had spent on making a fern. And then it became this gimmick amongst some of my friends that was like the fern to kill all ferns, and it was like a perfect fern, and like the hype for this fern became unreal by the end, because that was the only thing that heard about the game for years, was like this bloody fern. So now you get the hype as well, and it's not going to live up to it, but it's a pretty nice fern. So I think we can go a bit closer, if I can wiggle the camera into submission. Yeah, so the reason why it took like a week or maybe even 2 weeks to make a fern was because, of course, we iterated a lot. So that happens with almost anything, and it almost feels sometimes like we just start iterating, and then we iterate and prototype until we release. And this fern was no different. So we made a bunch of different versions. We made some that was just kind of a physics version, and they were just freaking out, as physics do, right? Like you thought you had control, and then they freak out, and it's like, we don't really like that. And then we tried some that was just like purely animation driven, but they were also not entirely satisfying. So in the end, we ended up with this mix where there's a fern, and then there's like a body of the fern, and there's a leaf, and they do kind of different things. So the body has different shake animation and is like just an animation driven thing. And we can kind of shake it from different direction. We can kind of check where the character is and kind of shake the body of the fern from different directions. And then there's like this main leaf sticking into the playground. And that one got a lot of extra love and care. So what it has is, it has this left-right animation that the animator did, which is just a completely linear animation, so no life at all. And then I would do a little float variable inside of the script controlling the fern, which would work as a physics velocity while not being physics simulated, because that was the problem, right? The physics simulation would freak out. So I have no real collision, but I have this one variable, which is the rotation speed of the fern. So that I can then influence, so I can push it when you move into it, and then when you move away, I can kind of let it sway normally. So instead of being locked into having to play the sway animation, now I have kind of dynamic control, so it can sway in any way I touch it. And if I kind of push it gently and like walk away gently, then it will have like follow me, and it will have a smaller, and if I kind of knock it, it will have like continue to move for a little bit. So all of a sudden we get all of this fidelity from a kind of physicsy, but not physics, because we didn't want to deal with that. And then if you jump into it, there's some logic there, and if you're kind of here and jumping above it, it will react hopefully well. You can do a thing where let's wiggle it a bit more. If you like here and jump. So it's kind of checking if you jump up in this pose and it can find its way underneath you, then it will do it. And there's actually another one over here. That's a good plated example of there's another fern there in the dark, which you will of course totally notice if you play this game. It's a good example of turning things down until you almost don't notice it, that first fern. But luckily there's the second one, so we did get to show off our work. And it's used at least 2 other places in the game, I think. So we reuse. But this notion of having this small physics parameter inside of the code was really good for keeping control, adding some fidelity, while still don't having to deal with the actual real physics. And the lever you saw before also has a similar one. So kind of if you let go of the lever at any random point, we don't have to deal with the animation of that. We just say, just run the physics, and then it will automatically apply a velocity, and it will kind of do its bounds, and it will resolve nicely. So that also helps us keeping the player in control. Now we go here. Mind that detach. Where is it? There. So we'd used it a couple of times, this velocity slider inside a device or a plant or whatever. And then we came to this device, which is a thing you rotate. And for this one, we went even further with this idea of fake physics or physics, and actually ended up doing it with physics, except excluding it entirely from the game world. So this device has, like, imagine an invisible sphere behind it that's a rigid body and physics driven, but don't collide with anything. And then what happens when you start interacting with this device is, depending on your input, will send torque or forces to this sphere that will then rotate, and it will have its friction. and whatnot. And then in return, it will then control the animation of this wheel. And the animation of this valve is 8 different poses. We wanted to have them like kind of have him idle and stuff, but we ended up just having them as poses, and then we blend between them. So when you rotate, it's actually blending between the poses, and then it's just rotating the lever behind it. But having this physics object in the background for this one turned out that it was just easier than implementing all of the drag and the friction and whatnot. It was convenient to have an actual physics object. And that was mainly because this device started getting more and more complicated. It's as many things in the inside, it's more complicated than it looks. So we started out wanting the player to be in control. So when you push the stick, now I'm pushing the stick left, the boy is kind of pulling the valve to the left, and if I hold the stick up, then the valve is up, and so forth. So it's really mapped exactly to my direction of the stick, which feels nice when you're kind of standing still and grabbing it, that it matches your stick direction. However, when you start moving, like when you start rotating, if you have to keep matching the stick, it looks really weird. And at some point you're rotating so fast that it can't really figure it out, and then you can kind of try and blend to it, but it became really weird. So in the end, when you start rotating, we change the state into rotation mode. So we spot that you're starting to do gestures, and we say, we'll just rotate. And that also lets us kind of clamp the rotation speed. So we do want to encourage the player to rotate fast, but we don't want them to be able to do it like insanely fast. So by changing into this rotation gesture, we can clamp that speed and kind of have a maximum rotation speed. And then it took a long time to kind of try and make the transition between the two. So if I'm going fast and it's in like rotation, and then I stop and it will be in one of the states, right? Or it will be matching my direction. And when you're rotating and let's try and get the speed, and then stops, he'll try and continue to rotate if it's possible, so he lines up in this. So there's this transition state between this kind of gesture mode and this kind of direct mode. And this was an interesting development with this device, and it went through lots of different hands and lots of different iterations. And it was very helpful to think of this kind of direct input versus the gesture. So do we map it to the exact input of the controller, or do we map it to kind of what we think the player intended to do? Of course, this kind of mapping it like this would be, okay, that's the direct version, and then when you do start rotating, that's more of a gesture. So that was an example of having actual physics, but not really control it. So similarly to the other one, that was something that helped us a lot with, again, just continuously having control. So now we're back at this spot. Next, I want to talk a bit about details we added when the player kind of starts to prod and poke around behind the curtain of the game. So we really wanted to kind of emphasize the world being consistent or always being present, and you're never really ending up at this point where it feels like the game didn't reply or it was unfinished or something like that. And we really want to encourage the player actually to explore and poke around and try all of these interactions and see all of these little details. We need to change mode. Yeah. So here's one example where you fall down on this platform like we did before. See, there's these 2 pots on the platform there. So when it bends, what happens? Well, of course, they slide off. And what happens if they fall all the way down in that valley? They break. And if I'm not actually sure if that's possible with the real controls, but with the teleportation you can kind of get down there fast enough. Let's see if we can do it. So there's a little animation on the pots breaking at the bottom, and then they leaves all of these shards from the pots. See if I can actually make it down fast enough. I'm not sure if it... And there's a cat and some litter, right? So it's not just an empty area. We want to say, oh, you jumped down here and kind of explored. We would like to also have the world continue down here. This could be one example, which is just like where you could fall down. But another way to kind of establish the world or reconfirm that it's there is like, for example, this. So you see he's up against the wall and he's holding his hands up, and if you push against the wall instead of maybe just running towards it, he'll kind of do this leaning against it, similarly to if you're interacting with things, but just kind of saying, oh, I heard your input, there's where the wall is. It's still there. And if you kind of walk here, he has a little animation where he's like, oh, he's looking down, it's like, wee, that's grim down there, I don't like that. And if we try over here, I try not to die. If you run towards the edge and stop, it's like, oof, there was an edge. So a different animation from when if it just stops here, it was no danger. But if you like here, it's like, oof, scary. And there's another one. If you turn right at the edge, you get this super, that was a close call. So we have a lot of fun putting these all sorts of the places in the game. So here's a gap where you would normally just jump across and you'd be running right and you'll never think back on that one lonesome gap. But if you should manage to fail the jump, or if you jump down there to explore, you'll see this suspicious looking shopping trolley that our animator put there. And if you think, what if I hit that shopping trolley? It's like, does this wiggle? It's like, okay, that was weird, but what if I like hit it directly in the shopping trolley? Let's see if I can actually do it. Boom! It's like, so all of a sudden I don't know, if the player ends up here, they're not focusing on the game anymore. Now they're stuck with this shopping trolley. It's like, this animation won't work if I fell from the other side. So like, what happens if I like fell from over here? Oh, there's a different one. So we have a lot of weird places like this, and sometimes, let's just see another example if I can find them. Mindhead. But really they're there, one, because we think it's very funny to make, and two, it helps that if the players start exploring, both the puzzles or the game or the interaction or the animation or anything really, we want there to continue to be game until they can't kind of poke any further. And it should help them stay inside this world. So here's another example. This was the valve from before with this elevator. Ooh, okay, I'm running out of time. I'll be quick. There's this very gruesome spike. We'll see if we can hit it. Oh. What was the time? How much time left? 2 minutes? I'm out. Oh, that will be the end. I was going to finish with playing a small section, but now you'll get to play it yourself. Thank you for your attention. And it's okay.